In this video, I'm going to give you a great technique to answer competency-based interview questions better. But if your knees start to go weak when those phrases are mentioned, then I can assure you, you are not alone. Because what they're asking for is for you to go into great detail about something that's happened in the past. Now, if you're like me and I'm 40 odd, I've got 2 kids and a few grey hairs, then half the time I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, let alone what my biggest challenge was last year and how I overcame it. It's tough, it's really tough. But with all that said, there's actually no reason to worry, because once you know how to structure your answers to these questions, then it's much easier to knock these questions out of the park. And not only that, I'm going to give you the most common competency-based questions you'll get asked as a B2B marketer. So make sure you watch until the end. Hello, if you're here for the first time, I'm Matt Dodgson and I'm a co-founder of Market Recruitment. And we help B2B marketers accelerate their careers, whether you're looking for a new marketing job or looking to hire into your marketing team. And while you're here, I'd recommend hitting the subscribe button below, followed by the bell, so you're notified when our next video lands. So what is a competency or a behavioural-based interview anyway, and why do some companies have them? Well, a competency-based interview is a way of a company testing that you have the skills or behaviours for the job. The idea is that the past predicts the future, so your behaviour in previous situations will give them a good idea as to how you'll react in future situations. An example could be, why don't you tell us about a time when you had a conflict with another team member? What happened and how did you handle it? And companies use them for a variety of reasons. At a top level, as I mentioned, it's to see whether or not you've got the marketing skills to do the job. But they're also used to see how you cope under pressure, whether or not you have the personality to fit the business and work with the team, or how much self-awareness you have. Basically, whether or not you've learned from the past, from your past experiences, or realised that what you did in that particular situation just wasn't right. Now, before we jump into the technique, it's important to discuss how companies measure your answers to them, because this can be one of the common reasons that people fall down on these questions in the first place. And let's just say it's a given that you've got the experience for the job, i.e. you've managed a big team or you've generated leads through pay-per-click or something like that, because if that's a core competency and you can't demonstrate it, then it's unlikely you'll get the job anyway. What we're focusing on here is more around the behaviours, basically your behaviour when getting things done. And what they're looking for are these types of traits. So you've got a positive approach to problems, you're willing to compromise, you understand that you're not perfect, you can handle pressured situations, and that you can learn and grow from your experiences. So why do people fall down on these questions? Well, there are 3 common reasons. One is that they play the hero too much. Yes, everything was rubbish. Everyone else was terrible. And it was me who fixed everything. I am amazing. Or they're too negative. They criticise too much and show a lack of empathy, which is an easy trap to fall into if you've just worked for a terrible boss or a poorly managed company. If that's the case, I'm sure you're feeling a bit hacked off, but these questions aren't the time to let off your frustrations, even if that does feel good. Or people just don't go into enough detail. Their answers can be quite short, which gives the interviewer the feeling that you just simply don't have the skills or experience of dealing with those situations. So with all that said, let's get into the technique itself. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the STAR technique, and it's a nice framework to use to structure your answers in a way that's easy for someone to understand. Remember, part of the success of these answers will be how you communicate it to the person interviewing who wasn't there, so you have to be clear. So, the S is for situation. This is where you set the scene and give some background to how you ended up in the situation in the first place. T is for task. So basically, what your job was in that situation. A is for action, so the action that you took, and there's a massive red flag here, especially if you're a B2B marketer, and that's the word we. Because the company isn't recruiting we, they're recruiting you. So you must use I and differentiate what tasks were collective ones and what you did. Super, super important that. And R, lastly, is for result. And in B2B marketing speak, that's got to be tangible ROI if you're talking about examples of your work. So let's see how this actually works in practice. Then we can get into the main competencies you can start to prepare for. Let's imagine you've been asked this question. Could you give us an example of when you've generated leads for a B2B business in the tech space with a limited budget? And your answer could go something like this. Okay, sure. Well, in 2016, I was working for MuleSoft as their marketing manager. At the time, they were fairly well established in the US, but not so in the UK. And actually, I was the 5th employee here, so it was very much like a startup. And really, my role was all about lead generation. I had a bit of support in the US, but my remit was to take a very small budget and execute some campaigns to fill the funnel for the sales team. So the first thing I did was to sit down with the MD and sales team to understand the target audience a bit better. And from there I could start to build a couple of personas which included things like their pain points. And on top of that, I also picked up the phone to some customers myself to see what they said their pain points were too. And after that, I had a really good idea of what was driving them to our solutions, and also some really good ideas for content. Now, with there being a limited budget, I had to get quite creative on the content. So what I decided to do was create a meaty bit of content in the form of a long blog post, which I wrote myself. Then alongside this, I worked with one of the sales team to create a webinar, which was pre-recorded so we could continue to use it on an ongoing basis. And within the blog post, I linked to the webinar. I also then promoted the post and the webinar through social on the website, and then boosted the content on LinkedIn to our target audience we'd established early on through sponsored posts. Then if people came to the website to read the blog, I could cookie them and then retarget them with the webinar. So that was the content. The conversion event was signing up to the webinar, and then during the webinar we offered a free assessment of their IT systems. Again, there's a lot of value and something I knew from my research would actually interest our audience. Now, that particular funnel ran for about 6 months before we made it even better, but in that first 6 months, we spent just over £10,000 on creating the content, promoting it, and the webinar itself. And in terms of results, we had just over 950 people sign up for the webinar, and then 120 take up the free IT assessment offer. And of those 120, we've closed 8 deals, which have been worth about 380,000. And sales have still got about another 120k in the pipeline. So I was really pleased with it. Now, you might be thinking 2 things. Oh, that's easy, no problem at all. Or you might be thinking, oh, bloody hell, that's tricky. And you might be amazing at interviews. And if you are, you probably shouldn't be watching this video anyway. But if you're like most people, then you'll probably feel you could perform a bit better at interviews. And my biggest piece of advice here is that practice makes perfect. So many marketers lose jobs because they fall into common traps for answering these questions. And that's because they have the mindset, well, I know I'm a good marketer, but I'll be fine in the interview. But trust me, there's a big, big difference between being a good marketer day to day and someone who's able to demonstrate they're a good marketer in an interview. It takes practice. So what I'd suggest is writing out your answer to these types of questions and literally rehearse them to yourself. And by writing it down and rehearsing them, you'll start to feel a lot more confident about delivering them well. You're not going to get it spot on every time, but the more you do it, the better your answers will become, until they just start rolling off the tongue. So, as a B2B marketer, what sort of competency questions should you prepare for? And that's a good question. Well, these are definitely some that I would prepare for. Working with other teams, particularly with sales. So you're more often going to get asked something about that, and it will probably be something around conflict, or when someone hasn't done something that they say they would, or perhaps if it's an EMEA role, how you've worked with different cultures. Another common one is plate spinning. How do you prioritize and organize yourself when you've got different stakeholders pulling you in different directions? So think about systems, how you build rapport, how you learn to push back in a nice way in those situations. So those are a couple of common ones from a behavioral perspective. But you can also get a really good clue from the job description itself too. So what I've done here is, I'm just on my Mac now, and I've done a simple search on LinkedIn for marketing manager jobs, London-based, with computer software companies. So there's a big list of companies come up. Here we are at the top. Woohoo! So one thing, and I just thought I'd pick out a few, and we could just have a look at the job descriptions and just see if we can pull out some of these competencies or some of the areas that I would think about preparing for. I've got one job here which is with a company called WI5. Not come across these guys, but actually, if you look at their stuff, their job advert or job description focuses less so on the behaviours. So if I was preparing for an interview with this company, then it gives you quite a few different aspects that you could be looking at. And what you could be doing then is just preparing some of these answers using that STAR technique to cover each of these different areas. And what you might find is once you started reading through it, you can probably build it into sort of 2 or 3 core things. And that could be from a sort of a technical perspective. So the skills and experience that you've had from a marketing point of view. It does talk a little bit about, for instance, working with the sales team here. So we talked about the behaviours earlier around working with other teams, and I think it talks about a design team as well. So, you know, you could probably guarantee that if a competency-based question came up on the behavioural side, it's going to be around working with other people and getting the most from them. So have a few, think about some examples from that where it's not worked, you know, where people have let you down, or where you've had to go in and sort of build relationships and make things better. Let's see what else we've got here as well. Let's have a look. Let's have a look on this one. Account-based marketing. So a little bit more specific. These guys look like they're a US business. Again, quite a bit of detail here. Collaborate with marketing, sales and creative teams to deliver collateral. So again, it's that sort of working with others piece which really comes up quite a bit. And let's have another look down. There we go. Self-starter who's built programs from the ground up. So that's a bit around the behavioural side there, self-starters. So, you know, if you can think about examples of when you've had to go into a company or into a role where actually you haven't really had a ton of support, you've got to sort of get out there and get on with it and start building stuff. That would be an obvious question they would ask. Give me an example of when you've been in a situation where you've had to take the onus for getting things done. What did you do? How did you go about it, sort of thing. Let's have a look. Some more technical stuff here about writing. Detail-orientated, deadline-driven, could be a bit of a behaviour. Here we go. Agile, collaborative, positive attitude and flexible. So when you think about some of the examples that you're going to be giving, and you know, I talked about sort of not playing the hero so much. So you could think about situations that you're in and then some of the learnings that you've taken from those situations. So you could talk about a situation that didn't go as well as you thought, and off the back of that then I've realised that in those sorts of situations I need to be a little bit more flexible, or I need to be a little bit more collaborative up front. So those sort of words there are really good. We've got the able to prioritise competing projects one, which was the example that I gave earlier. So that comes up. Not afraid to ask questions. So that's an interesting one. Let's click on this one, WSO2. Here we go. Yeah, so we've got lots of working with different teams. Metrics. So again, there's some good examples that you could use here. Plan, create, schedule, execute and measure targeted demand generation campaigns. So I mean, that's obviously going to be a big part of this sort of field marketing role. So Having some good solid examples around some of the stuff that you've done there in that star format would be absolutely fantastic. Let's go down into the desired stuff. There we go, 5-year. So this is quite an interesting one, this one here. Knowledge engaging local communities, meetups, user groups. It's a bit different. So I think you probably have to come up with something like that. Experience working in developer marketing or an open source community. So I guess that's the ability to be able to talk to technical people. Again, they don't really go into the behaviours too much. Successful candidate is someone who's here we go. Successful candidate is someone who takes initiative, doesn't hesitate to make constructive suggestions, can manage budgeting and scheduling, and most of all is results orientated. Okay, so it looks like they're just repeating things a bit there, doesn't it? I think they've just added 2 job descriptions on there, which 2 for the price of 1. But so that actually gives you there a bit of an idea of some of the stuff. Let's do one more then. Let's have a look. Let's go down to more of a junior level then, sort of marketing executive, EMEA with SS&C technologies. Here we go. So again, we've got responsibility, stakeholders again. It's a real common theme, that one. Partner with EMEA subject matter. Organise and manage. Okay, some stuff there about looking after the trade shows, events. Working with centralised teams. So again, another engage in an active feedback loop with the head of international field marketing, another marketing team. So you look at how many times that's sort of been mentioned throughout the job description. So working with others, working with different stakeholders, working with different areas of the business, sales, business directors, account management, working then with your centralized marketing team, then also with your head of marketing or the head of field marketing. So loads of stuff there. Okay, and then in terms of the behavioral stuff, we've got here we go. Ability to work independently, use initiative and solve problems. So good questions that they would perhaps use would be something like, give me an example of a time where you've had to work independently on a subject. What was that and how did it work out for you? Or give me an example of when you had to use your own initiative. What was that situation and how did that pan out for you? Or again, talk to us about when you've had to solve problems. Talk to me about a problem that you've had to solve from a lead generation perspective. What was the problem? How did you solve it? And what were the results off the back of it? So, the job description is a really great place to start working. And you can start to pull out a few themes, both from a technical perspective. So this is just describing the stuff that you've actually done, whether it be lead gen, all that sort of stuff. Lead gen, partner marketing, content, inbound, outbound, all that sort of stuff. So those are the examples of the sort of the technical stuff. As well as then when you start to go into these experience, skills and qualifications, it will give you then those softer stuff that you've got to talk about. Working with people, working independently, showing initiative, solving problems, all those kind of things. So they're giving you the competencies up front. So just spend a bit of time looking at this sort of stuff and then just go through what we've talked about, map it out, write it out, use the STAR formula, have it on some cards and walk around your house at night, have it in front of you, looking at it, reading it, saying it out loud. The more you do that, the more you will feel confident talking about it in an interview, and the more confident you feel talking about an interview, the more successful you'll be. So I hope you found that useful. Feel free to drop me any ideas for future videos in the comment section below. And finally, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel below and hit the bell so you get notified when our next video lands. Good luck and speak soon.